Good to see you. You know that moment when you think you're waiting for music and that's not the music, and you're like, is this my music? Is this not my music? You ever get that before you walk on the stage? You ever feel that way? Most of you are like, no, that was one of those moments. Glad you're here. My name's Eric, and we're wrapping up our series today called Choose. Inside your program, you've got a little piece of paper like this. Would you pull it out and look at it real quick? We talked about this for a couple of weeks now. As a part of our Choose series, we are doing, as a community, a 90-day Choose challenge. And the invitation is for you to join with us. And we're inviting as many families as we possibly can get into this, to do this with us, to make a commitment for the next 90 days. It starts February 1, goes through May 1, to be thoughtful, purposeful, and biblical about our giving. So we talked about giving, biblical giving being sacrificial, cheerful, consistent. That was a talk 2 weeks ago. If you missed it, you can go back and listen on YouTube. And so this is an opportunity for us to be thoughtful and purposeful over the next 90 days together about our giving patterns. And so you can choose down here on the bottom, like which of those expressions of sacrificial giving represent you and the commitment you feel God leading you to make. You can choose what level of cheerfulness, how you're going to give. There's a money-back guarantee on the back, which you can read about. We're serious about this stuff. And there's some swag you can choose. We'll send you some text along the way. But this is the last Sunday that you can sign up. You can sign up online for the next 2 days. But the gun goes off on the 1st. And we would love to have you participate. I think so far we've got about 30 families as of this morning that have signed up for this, which is great. And that means a lot of us have yet to do so. And so I'm praying about, even today as I'm teaching, I'm asking the Lord, and the reason I'm talking about this now is I want our talk even today to kind of stir up in you, maybe like, what is it, God, you're calling me to do? And then at the end of the gathering, fill us out, drop it in the black box as you leave. Or you can, like I said, do it online. If you're online or even in the room, you'd rather do it from your phone, you can do that today and participate that way. Okay, we've been looking at a choice every week in our series that no matter what happens in life, you and I have the freedom to choose. And the choices we make lead us on a certain path and trajectory in life. I want to talk about the tension today, the choice between greed and generosity. Greed and generosity, two very, very different qualities. So let's just find out where we're at today. How many of you right now in the room would say that you would describe yourself as a generous person? By a real high show of hands, don't be afraid to stick it up there. A nice generous high, yeah, good. Which means if you didn't raise your hand, you're the greedy ones. You didn't know there was only two options, did you? Yeah. No. So how many of you would say, actually, I'm a fairly greedy person? Anyone want to just own that for a second? Just front row. Front row. Wow, a lot of greed on the front row. You're hogging all the good seats. Isn't that interesting? Like nobody wants to describe themselves as a generous person because that feels a little arrogant and self-promoting. And yet nobody wants to say that they're a greedy person because who's greedy? None of us here are greedy. We're going to talk about that very tension today. I want to introduce it with a question. I want to pose a question to you that you have probably never thought of before. It's a question that's a little counterintuitive, and it's one that you're probably going to push back on a little bit. And the question is simply this: why do I have so much? Why do I have so much? Would you say that question with me? Why do I have so much? Most of us have never asked ourselves that question before. And even for some of us, we're pushing back right away. You're thinking, Eric, I don't know what world you live in, but I don't have a bunch of extra money burning a hole in my pocket right now. I'm sorry, burning holes in my pocket. I'm not there. I don't have this extra. I'm not sure what you're talking about. And the reality is, some of us are feeling the tension financially, maybe more than others. And if that's you, listen, your church is here for you. We have an entire ministry of our church that serves those, not only in our church, but in our community that find themselves in difficult times or up against difficult financial pressures for a variety of reasons. They come alongside of our people in our community to support. So if that's you, we're here to help, right? So this isn't just an issue, though, of income and how much money we make, because you know as well as I do that as your income increases in life, what increases at the same time? Your expenses. As more comes in, hey, I got some extra. More goes out. And so the tension, no matter how much or how little you make, the tension between do I have enough never goes away, which is why this question is so important. Why do I have so much? Most of the world, let's just be, because you and I have a lot. We're doing very, very well. Most of the world looks at us and they don't even know what to think. Like the average person in the world looks at an American person living at the poverty line, which I looked this week, $15,000 a year for an individual. The world looks at someone at the poverty line in America and thinks to themselves, what would I even do with $15,000? You understand that, don't you? They cannot get their head around Like they're like, I could spend money the rest of my life and not even come up with enough creative ideas to spend that much money. Like they don't even have a frame of reference for it. We have so much. And yet we rarely slow down to ask ourselves, why? Like, why do I have so much? Why do I have more than I need? And this affects every aspect of your life. I mean, the obvious thing to talk about is the finances, because they're, money's, it's like Danny said, they're green. You can hold them, right? You can count them. They're very tangible. But this question affects every aspect of your life. It affects your relationships, your time, your family, your home, your possessions, the opportunities that come your way, the experiences that you've had in your life, the good ones and the bad ones. Like all of that are things that you have. And the question becomes, why do I have so much? So if you have a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 12. And for the fourth week in a row, we're going to look at the same story we've looked at the whole way through this series. And then we'll take a break from this story for a little while and move on to something else. But we're actually going to teach through the passage today. We've talked about this story a few times, but I haven't talked or taught through it. So we're going to do that this morning in Luke chapter 12, starting, I think, in verse 13. Context is Jesus is teaching a big crowd. 1,000 or so people are there. And then from the crowd, someone poses a question, which gets us into today's teaching. It says, then someone called from the crowd, and they're talking to Jesus. They said, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." And Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed." Now, I wasn't there. You weren't either. I imagine this guy, when he heard Jesus say, guard against every kind of greed, I don't know if he said it, but I bet he thought to himself, whoa, greed? Hold on. Who's being greedy here? This is an issue of greed, teacher. This is an issue of what is rightfully mine. My father's died. My brother owes me my fair share. Okay? This is about justice. This is not about greed. And if we're going to throw like accusations, Jesus, if anybody's being greedy, it's my brother. Like he's the one that won't share with me. Greed. I love how Jesus totally flips the topic of conversation. And Jesus says in this moment that this is no longer an issue to be settled in a court. For Jesus, this is an issue to be settled in the human heart. This isn't about an estate. This is about a heart condition called greed. It occurred to me this week, greed's a tricky thing. Did you know that no one has ever gone to court and been convicted of greed? Like no one's ever been found guilty of the crime of greed. It's not a crime. There's nothing illegal about being greedy. If you want to be greedy, you can. Now, that greed will often lead to other things that you can be found guilty of. But in itself, greed is not a crime. But Jesus is like, this is not what we're talking about. That's why he says here, he says, teacher, or he says, friend, who made me a judge over you? Like he's not saying I'm not a judge. He's simply saying, this is not like this whole legal arena about real estate. That's not my world. Let's talk about what I care a lot about. Let's talk about what I'm focused on. Let's talk about the condition of your heart. I see some greed in there. And greed, again, it's tricky because it's hard to see it in our own lives. When I asked earlier, how many of you are greedy? Just a couple of honest people up front. And you guys are being very kind. You're very generous people. But the rest of us were like, I'm not putting my hand up. We don't see greed in our own lives. Now, we can see other negative character qualities. I won't make you list them, but you probably know what some of those are. Like you look in the mirror and you see someone who sometimes is dishonest. You may not want to admit it all the time, but we know when we're being dishonest. We know when we're being selfish in a conversation with somebody we love. We know when there's anger in us, right? We may not, again, want to admit it, but we can see those things when we look in the mirror. But you cannot see greed in the mirror. It's just nobody really describes themselves or thinks of themselves as a greedy person. Now, I can see greed in your mirror. I'll tell you, Anna. Like my brother, right? He's got the estate. He's the one that's being greedy. You can see greed in mine. Like we see it in other people, but we cannot see it in ourselves. And so Jesus just starts a conversation and he says, beware, careful. This greed thing will sneak up on you. You got to guard against it. And then he adds this little line to the man. He says, life is not measured by how much you own. Agree? Of course. We all know that. Of course, life is not measured by how much we own. We know that here. And yet, if you look at the way we live, and you just watch maybe your life like somebody could watch mine from a distance, they might start to think otherwise. I know, well, how about, if you like philosophy, there was a philosopher, Diogenes, 400 BC. Anybody know about Greek philosopher Diogenes? He's all about looking for an honest man. Everywhere he went, he had a lamp, and he would walk around looking for an honest man, and he could never find one. And that was part of his whole philosophy, was nobody was honest. And one of the ways he would sometimes assess that is he would ask people, are you an honest person? And they would describe all the things that they did with their life and all the things that they've come to acquire. And he would challenge them and talk about how they work all day long to acquire these things, and they stay up all night to make sure no one steals them. And then he would say to them, you're not honest. You say you own those things. You don't own those things. Those things own you. They've consumed you. And I think he's on to something. I get it. Life is not measured by how much I own. It's not measured by how much you own. And yet, if you look at the way I live my life, man, we acquire. And I can so easily look at what I've got or what I don't have. And I was in the garage yesterday, and I was looking at my miter saw, and I'm like, that miter saw is like, it's like older than my oldest kids. It's embarrassing to have that thing. It doesn't even cut straight anymore. Probably need a new one. Don't you agree, anyone? Like I just find myself caught, or whatever it is, like you think like there's a sense of, I need to get the one more thing because that'll really be better and life will be good. But that's not where real life is measured. Once again, Jesus says, be careful. Greed, believing that your life is the sum total of that which you acquire and own and possess, that will lead you down a very dangerous road. And then Jesus tells a story, which has been the basis for this whole series so far. He tells it to this man, he tells it to the crowd listening, and I think he tells it to you and I today. It says, then he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, what should I do? I don't have room for all my crops. That's a good problem to have, right? This is a guy who's got an abundance on an abundance. He's got food to eat, food for next year, and then extra food he doesn't know what to do with. Don't you feel sorry for this guy? He's in a tough situation. He doesn't know what to do. I for one, can totally relate to this guy because I get it. I mean, this is where I live sometimes. It's like, what am I going to do? So some of you have been to my house. We have a lot of events at our home. And if you've been to our house before, you may have noticed that I have a pretty nice garage. Anybody seen my garage before and been a little jealous? You didn't covet it. You just, because that would be bad. But yeah, I've got a pretty nice garage. My father-in-law built the house years ago. He was a contractor, so when he built it, he made sure that there was plenty of garage space. At its prime, I think I had enough room to park 8 or 9 cars in the garage. Oh, yeah. Now, I've shared some with my wife. I allowed her to turn one into a bonus room, which is quite generous of me, if I do want to say so myself. But I still have some pretty good shop. I have 2,000 square feet of garage. I have as much garage as I have house, which is just about right, if you ask me. And yet, like I said, I was in the garage yesterday, and I'm looking around, and I'm just like, I need a little bit more space. I'm not sure this bonus room thing's working out. Like, what are we doing? Maybe I could take that back on, and like, it's a little too cluttered. So my point is, like, do you feel sorry for me too? Do we feel sorry for this guy? Like, what am I going to do? Like, we feel this tension, right? We look at what we have, and it's like, it's not quite enough. How am I going to solve this problem? This man, he's like, what am I going to do? I've got a problem here. And what's interesting about the story, and we've said this again for 4 weeks now, is you and I already know what this guy should do, don't we? I mean, the solution is so obvious to us. But greed can't see itself in the mirror. And what seems so obvious and evident to you and to me as we look at his life never even crosses his mind. Here's what he comes up with. Here's the best he could do. Then he said, I know. Aha! I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. I tried that with Nicole yesterday. Honey, if we could tear down the garage, and she didn't go for it. Tear down our barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, I love how he talks to himself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. By the way, I haven't said this in the series so far. If you want to do a fun little Bible study later, go back and read this story and watch and count how many times this man refers to himself in the story. Me, my, friend. Like, find out who the main character of his life really is. I'm going to sit back and say to myself, you've got enough for years. Eat, drink, and be merry. Right? This guy's like arrived. In America, he's like success, right? We don't know how old he is in the story. Again, this is a story that Jesus told. It's like a parable. It may have been based on some factual event. This doesn't seem very far-fetched. Like, I imagine this kind of thing did happen frequently back then as it happens today. But I imagine this guy's probably he's younger in life. He probably was retiring early. He's got extra set aside, doesn't have to worry anymore. Like, he would be a hero. It seems as if he has done everything right. Until God shows up. And God says some pretty uncomfortable words with him in verse 20. God said to him, "You fool." Not words you want to hear from God. "You fool. You will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?" Wow. You will die this very night. See, the mistake that the man in this story made wasn't that he saved for the future. Okay, we talked about that a few weeks ago as well. Nothing wrong with saving for the future. The mistake he made was assuming he had a future. Okay, nothing wrong with saving for tomorrow, but let's be careful not to assume that we will have a tomorrow, because none of us know when our time comes up. And here he was focused on tomorrow and what I'm going to do and all these plans, and I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry, and life's going to be great. And little did he know that he would never be able to enjoy in person or in generosity that which God had put in his hands. You fool. Tonight, it's gone. This man, imagine this scenario played out. He would have been surrounded in the first century by countless families that were living at the poverty level. Poverty was normal in the first century amongst the people of Israel. It was just the way, it was the water people swam, and that's all they knew. This man with plenty, with extra, with abundance, would have been surrounded by impoverished families, many of whom, I would imagine, if you think about the context of the story, this guy probably owned a lot of land. They probably lived on his land. Many of them probably worked for him. And it never occurred to him, wonder why I have so much. If God gives us the ability to produce wealth, whether we acknowledge him or not, then I wonder why God might have me in this position where I'm at, living when and where I do. I wonder why I have more than I know what to do with. And he just wraps his hands around it, builds bigger barns, that's my plan, and just assumes it's all for him. If you want to squash greed in your life, if I want to crush greed, the way that I do that is through generosity. You don't just say, I'm not going to be a greedy person anymore. No. You combat it by going the opposite direction, and you begin to express generosity. Matter of fact, I would say it this way, the generosity is the vaccine for greed. Generosity is the vaccine for greed. Who's been vaccinated? Is that a safe question? Can I ask that question? It's like, whoa, hold on. Has it been long enough that we can have fun with that? I'm not sure we can have fun with that anymore. It's been ruined forever. It's the vaccine for greed. You want to build an immunity against greed. There's no such thing as herd immunity when it comes to greed. Okay? It doesn't happen on a herd level. It happens on an individual level. It happens through choice. I'm going to choose generosity. And as I express generosity, it's like I'm getting my shot. And greed, it doesn't have the ability to rise up in me as much as it did anymore, because I'm training myself to live differently. I think Doug said last week that when we live with open hands, it's hard to clench our fists with greed. Opening our hands teaches us to free our grip on what we're holding so that we can also freely receive. All right, this is the way we want to live, not like this. Generosity just forces those hands open. We share what God has given to us. Jesus gets all the way through the story, and then he makes it very evident what his point is. Here's the application of the story that Jesus tells us. Jesus says this, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. You fool, he said to the man, you die tonight. Now he says, a person's a fool to store up earthly wealth. There's nothing wrong with storing up earthly wealth. There's nothing wrong with wealth. The issue is to store up earthly wealth, to focus on possessions, but not have a rich relationship with God. It's focusing on one to the neglect of the other. If I can have a rich relationship with God, which we'll talk about, then the wealth thing, it's a secondary issue, because now I have a relationship that shapes what I do with what I have been given. It tells me why I have so much. I love this language of a rich relationship with God. I just think about that language of something that's rich. Have you ever had a dessert that's really rich? It's like, whoo! I'm not saying we can only have so much of Jesus and we're like, okay, no more, I can't handle you anymore. But like, when you have a rich dessert, it's like, wow, that's strong, it's potent. Like there's so much packed in here. It's like, it's almost more than somebody can handle. Like that's the kind of relationship with God. Like, oh, it's overwhelming. It's like, wow, it's so thick. It's so rich. Or maybe you've had conversation with a friend that's rich. Nicole and I had some friends last Sunday. They just texted us out of the blue and said, hey, we're coming over. We're bringing a bottle of wine and some appetizers. And they just showed up. And we sat in the living room for about an hour. And we just caught up and we talked about life. And we had rich relationship. We had rich conversation together and just built community together. That is what real life is measured by. It's how rich and deep and significant our relationship with God is. Jesus made it really, really clear in Matthew chapter 25 what a rich relationship with God looks like. He says, and you can read it later in Matthew 25, that when you and I act generously towards someone else that we see that's in need, when we clothe the naked, he gets real specific. When you quench the thirst of those who are thirsty, when you visit the prisoner, when you care for the sick, when you welcome the stranger, Jesus says, when you do that, you're actually doing it for me. That when you live generously towards someone else and express like compassion to them in a way that benefits and lifts them up with what you've been given, you're actually acting rich toward me. I love Weston's question earlier about cookies. Anybody a chocolate chip cookie fan? Any chocolate chip cookie fans? Let me see your hand if you love chocolate chip. I love, Brooke and I were talking about chocolate chip cookies, and the worst thing is when you grab a chocolate chip cookie and you go to bite it and you realize as you bite it, there's oatmeal raisin. That is like the biggest false advertising. It's like, no. Brushing your teeth, trying to get that flavor out of your mouth. Right? I love chocolate chip cookies. So, Brooke, do you want to give me a hand? Yeah, come on up. Can you welcome Brooke as she's coming? She's going to help us out. A little fun here. We both acknowledge that we love chocolate chip cookies. And so, good to see you. Your first time on stage at Cedar Hills. This is great. Good. So, chocolate chip cookies, I'm a fan. Come on over. Don't be afraid. It's okay. Did you happen to bring any chocolate chip cookies with you today? No? Oh, it's a bummer. Sorry. Yeah, I actually did. I knew I was going to talk about this, so I brought a whole plate of them. Oh, my gosh. Oh, you guys are excited. Yeah. Don't they smell? Can you smell them? There's a few different. Yeah, those. Wow, they look really good. I'm going to try. Oh, man. Wow, they taste as good as they smell. I'm so bummed you didn't bring any chocolate chip cookies with you. Aren't you guys... One sec. Yeah, those are, I like semi-sweet. I like the semi-sweet chocolate chips. Yeah. Wow. You know what? This is ridiculous. How greedy of me. I can't eat all of these right now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to eat this one, and I'm going to save these for later. So that I can kind of spread it out, and tomorrow I can sit back and I can eat and drink and be merry and just have some cookies. Yeah. So there's two things going through your mind right now. Let me just say what they are. Number one is you're thinking, I really want a chocolate chip cookie. I got the front row's attention. Second thing you're thinking is, if there's one thing you could tell me about my chocolate chip cookies right now, that what you think I should do with my cookies and with Brooke in this moment, what would it be? Share. Yeah, you think I should share. And here's why. Because you don't think I care about Brooke. You don't. But I do care, Brooke. And I'm bummed that you don't have any chocolate chip cookies. No, I mean that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray for you. Come here. And so I'm just going to pray that God would bring, God, I just pray for my friend Brooke, Lord, that would you just extend a hand of prayer towards Brooke right now? And I just pray, God, you'd bring somebody along who has some cookies they can share with her, and that you would satisfy that sweet tooth in her. Amen. All right. You're doing great. Hang in there. Almost done. Now, this is a little bit over the top, right? You're like, come on, Eric. This is fine. We're laughing, and it's great. But is it possible that this little metaphor of these chocolate chip cookies captures how we often go through our day and don't even realize it? I mean, it's so obvious in the story. We read the story about this man. He's got so much built up. He's got extra. He's got barns full, and then extra he's not even sure where to put. And it's so clear to us what he ought to do with what he has. You look at me with my plate of chocolate chip cookies, and Brooke doesn't have any, and it's so evident to you, Eric, you're not using your chocolate chip cookies well, man. You got to share what God's given you, and you know, or somebody gave you, and pass them on. You know, like they came easily, give them easily. And yet, when it comes to our own lives, it's so hard to see greed in the mirror. And we come up with excuses and reasons why we don't want to share with others what we've been given. All right, those are for you. You can do the whole plate, the whole tray. I'm sorry, yeah. There you go. Thank you. You can do whatever you want. They're yours, not mine. Thanks, Brooke. That was a good cookie. I'm going to finish that here in a little bit. Love it. So imagine if God could see all the people in the world who have chocolate chip cookies, at the same time see all the people who don't have any chocolate chip cookies. What might God say to all the people who have a plate of chocolate chip cookies? Of course. Real life, Jesus says, is not measured by how much you own. It's measured by what you do with what you've given. It's measured by how rich your relationship with God is. Jesus says a rich relationship with God is one characterized, again, Matthew 25, by a life that invests in others what has come into your possession, by meeting needs around you. Those are physical needs, they're relational needs, they're emotional, tangible, sometimes financial needs. And when we learn to open up our hands with what we've been given, we feed generosity, right? We squash greed, and we experience the kind of freedom that Jesus wants to invite each and every one of us into. I want to pray for us about that, and I hope that there's an application you're thinking of in your own life where you're like, okay, man, maybe there's a little bit more greed in me than I was willing to admit when we started this experience together. And just, if that's the case, just ask Jesus to meet you in that and his Holy Spirit to strengthen you, okay? God, thanks so much for the many things that we have found in our possession. It is so easy in our darker moments to think about what we don't have and what if and if only, and we compare ourselves. But the reality is we have so much in our lives. Again, not just in a material or monetary way, but in so many aspects. And if we just choose for a moment to not focus on the gaps, instead of focus on what is present, we are rich in so many ways. We have more than we need. And I just pray that that question that we began with today, why do we have so much, would stick with us. And when we see opportunities all around us, that we would be the kind of people with open hands who walk over and we express an act of love and service towards someone, a cup of cold water, an act of compassion, a warm embrace, a welcome, whatever it might look like. And by doing that, by investing what you've given us into kingdom-minded, Jesus-centered work in this world, that we would realize that we are fulfilling a purpose and a cause that is so much greater than ours. May we not hold tightly in fear that we will run out. May we not allow scarcity to drive us forward, but instead to just spend our lives while we can. The man in the story at the end, it says that somebody else got everything he had. They got it not because he was generous, they got it because he was dead. May we not make the mistake of waiting until it's too late to pass on to someone else what we've been given. May we take full opportunity in this day to invest into others and to invest in your kingdom. Jesus, thanks so much for your love. You love us for who we are, not for what we do, and for that we're so grateful. And we pray all of us in your strong, powerful, generous, life-giving name. And everybody said amen together. So, reminder once again, we've got these cards. Oh, look at there, a cookie. We've got these cards. Inside your program, I want to encourage you to fill this out, drop it off. It kicks off this week. We're going to send you encouragement along the way, so don't miss out on that opportunity. And we didn't want to just keep all the cookies for Brooke and I, and so we do have cookies in the back for everybody. So as you leave, sorry online, suckers, you should have been in the room. Oh, man. They're good. So go enjoy each other's company. We've got 5 minutes before kids get released. I'm talking with my mouth full. My mom is so embarrassed right now. And have a chocolate chip cookie, okay? Thanks, everybody.